South Center, an intergovernmental policy think tank with an eye to advising emerging nations. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Also with us, Ali Fatemi, who teaches economics at the American Graduate School and who just told me off camera that he's had to rewrite his whole course this year. Why is that?
Well, the rules seem to have changed. All the regulations, players, everything, usually professors like to use their old notes. But I guess in this course, at least, we have to change many things.
All right. And also with us, talk about thinking globally and acting locally, LEROUX, the CEO of Ethos Paris, which, correct me if I'm wrong, markets clothing and apparel while respecting sustainable development guidelines.
That's right.
And here with a look as well as how businesses are taking a look, of course, at all of what's going on in Seoul. You can weigh in, by the way, on the conversation on the France 24 Debate Facebook page. And Ali Fatemi, it is difficult to imagine that it's only been 2 years that the G20 has existed.
Yes, it is true, but remember, G20 is now carrying the load for what used to be G8, G7 plus Russia. And it is much more balanced because it has brought in some of the emerging economies. It has a wider base, and I think it has more representativeness of the whole world instead of just having the top rich countries.
There were high hopes at the outset.
Yes, I think the scenario changed because everybody thought they were going there to convince the Chinese to come off their high horses, and Mrs. Merkel changed the show by attacking the U.S. and the Q2 policy and so on. So I think it is going to be a draw match. Neither China nor the U.S. are going to give in.
All right, we're going to get to that in a moment. First, though, let's look at the bare facts of the G20. 20 nations, as the name says, 2/3 of our fair planet's population represented, 90% of the Earth's wealth. But for many, it really only boils down, as Ali Fatemi was saying, to 2 nations.
Although the G20 might include developed and developing countries, as you can see with the currency war between the US and China, we're worried that it's more like a G2 than a G20.
All right, those are the words there of the head of the South Korean Trade Union Confederation. Robert BRUSCA, do you agree with that assessment?
No, I think it's more like gee whiz. It doesn't look to me like there's much progress being made. I think that part of the problem is lacking a cohesive way to look at what the world needs. I think the United States made a big tactical error by going in, Tim Geithner's idea of trying to press for these quantitative rules on these different countries. Countries don't like to agree to these quantitative rules. Having a macro, ratio, a macroeconomic ratio where you're going to have exports, some percentage of GDP, net exports, some percentage of GDP. Countries aren't really made to work that way, so nobody really wants to make that kind of pledge. I think that the U.S. would have been better off trying to go in and explain why the Federal Reserve was pursuing this QE2 policy. And why
explain to us what QE2 is.
And they didn't do that. I'm sorry?
Explain to us what QE2 is.
Well, QE2 is just an attempt to try to jumpstart the economy with monetary stimulation. And very interestingly, a survey today of U.S. economists basically have said they don't think it's going to work. But when you look at the G20, you have 19 countries in the world that seem to think that it's having a big impact on the dollar and that it's a terrible thing. I think this is an incredible conundrum and a disconnect. How come U.S. economists think this isn't going to work, and the G19, other than the U.S., all think that this is such a bad thing? It's quite curious. And in fact, if you look at it, what's very curious to me is that apparently the reason that the QE2 is a bad thing from the G20 perspective is that the dollar is declining. But if you look at the U.S., it's a huge economy. It has a gigantic, persistent current account deficit. And when that happens, your currency is supposed to fall. So if anything, the introduction of QE2 seems to be stimulating economic adjustment along the lines that are appropriate, not inappropriate. I'm really flabbergasted that so many countries are taking this point of view the U.S. is doing something wrong. They wanted us to do something about our current account deficit. Well, now we're starting to do something about it, and nobody wants to kick in and do their part. I find this very curious.
Martin KHOR, what do you make of all of this?
Well, I think the problem is that many economists also in the U.S. are very worried that this quantitative easing, the pumping of $600 billion into the U.S. economy, might not do the job it's supposed to do, because when so much money is pumped in, but then the investors do not feel that they're going to get much money in the U.S., then a large part of this $600 billion is going to flow out of the U.S. in search of higher profit, and it might end up in the emerging economies, especially in Asia, but also in Brazil. And maybe 10 years ago, developing countries would have been very happy to receive whatever money comes into their economy. But we have learned the lesson from the Asian crisis and other crises that if you have a surge of foreign money coming into the economy and it is not properly controlled, then this will end up in higher inflation. The stock market prices will go up. Property prices of housing will go up. And the currencies that we have will appreciate, which makes our exports more expensive. And then one day when the mood changes, for example, the U.S. increases its interest rate or something, the money will then flow out very suddenly and leave a lot of chaos in our economies. This is what happened in 1997-98 in Asia, which then led to the devastation of our economies, because what comes in as hot money can also flow out very suddenly as hot money. And in the meanwhile, many things happen to our real economy. And this is why today many emerging economies do not welcome the inflow of hot money because of the damage that it can do. And this is why they are concerned about quantitative easing. If the quantitative easing led to a recovery of the United States economy, because the money, all the money remains in the U.S. and is spent in the U.S. for domestic expansion in the U.S., then there will not be this worry. But the worry is that the money will flow abroad and lead to financial instability in the emerging economies.
We'll go, and LEROUX, that's an interesting point, that the currencies are fluctuating. They're going, and the worry, Martin KHOR is saying that they might go in and out very quickly, so therefore the fluctuations are like a yo-yo. As a businesswoman, how do you deal with that problem?
Well, we work mainly with India, and I would say 90% of our business is coming from India. And at one point, it was really causing havoc between our producers and us, because everything was based on the dollar. And the dollar was mostly falling at that time, and causing our producers to want to raise the prices every month or two, which of course we couldn't allow. And so we finally decided that we would index everything on the euro and eliminate the in-between, because actually the dollar didn't really mean anything for us. We're dealing in euros and they're dealing in rupees.
And a few months back we saw the euro was dipping, but now it's strong again. Do you regret that decision?
I didn't regret it. It did cause our margin to drop, because as soon as we agreed to index everything on the euro, then the prices became, the dollar equals the euro. And so our prices went up with the producers. But we're in fair trade, and so we try to work things out with our producers, and we absorbed part of that. But as soon as the euro started fluctuating, then they panicked again. But this time we told them that we'd have to, just discuss it and see what the increase in the prices, because there's not only the fluctuating money, there's also the price of cotton that has gone way up. I don't know if you've...
And cotton is traded in dollars.
And so, it is on the global market, but organic cotton that we deal with is outside of that. It's marginal, but it still went up. And so that means that we've had to absorb part of that in our margins, and it's really not the time. And also, we're considering how we're going to increase our prices to try to stay on mark for the next seasons, and it's not going to be easy.
All right, Ali Fatemi, what Anne is describing here sounds like an incredible headache, having to deal with all the time these changes in currencies, which seem to be growing larger and larger.
But that's true. But
so what can the G20 do about something like that?
Well, let me say, what is happening, what she said about cotton, is one of the dangers everybody is looking at. Prices of commodities are going to rise in anticipation of the inflation. But remember, we have to look out for two things not to happen. One is capital control, and the other one is protectionism. The world is on the edge of making a mistake. If there are capital controls or protectionism, we are all going to be in trouble. I think if the U.S. economy picks up, the whole world would benefit. Very seldom I agree with Mr. Obama, but in this case I totally agree with him. But remember, he's also in a bind because the new Congress is not going to let him go on with his stimulus plan. So quantitative easing is the only way open for him in order to resolve the problem of unemployment in the United States. His responsibility is to the American